It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, April 5th, 2024. Sam Park in Los Angeles. John Ramey with you in Fresno, California. The jobs market is hot. Erdogan endures a turkey of an election result, Sam. Israel says they're going to fire officers after a blundered airstrike kills aid workers. And Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary of the United States, is currently making her second trip to China. Shall we start with the jobs report, Sam?
Sure.
303,000 jobs added in the month of March. That blows away the predicted 205,000 job gain that was anticipated by the experts. And I thought one other note was interesting, this reporting coming from CNN. In March, the leisure and hospitality industry added an estimated 49,000 jobs, and that brings overall employment in the sector to 16.9 million. And that finally surpasses February of 2020, which, of course, was the last jobs report in that sector hit possibly hardest by COVID-19. So leisure and hospitality, along with healthcare and government, had been the primary drivers of job growth during the past year as part of the recovery. But now we know it took 4 years for all those waitresses and bartenders and things like that to get back to pre-pandemic and now have exceeded pre-pandemic levels.
Well, yes, you're in a hotel right now, John. I mean,
as a matter of fact, I am.
You're part of the recovery.
Yes. We have college sports to thank for it, I guess.
Well, but that's always something, right? I mean,
right.
That there's any number of reasons why people might be visiting such establishments.
Anything of note for you in the jobs report? I mean, does this mean the Fed's not going to cut rates? Because, again, it's all gas and no brakes on this U.S. economy.
They might postpone rate cuts. In fact, one of the governors, I think her name was Michelle Baumann, said today that there might need to be a rate hike. And now she's just one member of the Federal Open Market Committee that makes these decisions. And she did not say, that there are definitely going to be a rate hike because she doesn't make this decision all by itself. Investors seem to have taken this comment in stride. In other words,
big day for Wall Street today, despite that.
Yeah. And so, a little while ago, if anybody from the Fed had said anything about rate hikes, the markets would have just gone crazy. But it doesn't seem to have happened today.
When does Wall Street close, Sam? I should know that. It's up 300 right now. It's got to be close to close. Maybe at 1:30 Pacific? Yeah.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah.
And so, again, it seems as though, apart from the people who make job estimates in the labor market, people are coming into alignment about what they expect from the economy. Still, though, this does raise the possibility, as you were saying, that interest rate cuts might be postponed a little bit farther into the future from what people have been expecting. But again, investors don't seem to be in a panic about that, and so that's probably good.
There was one other note that black unemployment had risen for the third consecutive month, and there was a very kind of academic response quoted in reporting by CNN about this from an expert who said it's more signal than noise. And I thought, well, that's probably true, and their explanation seemed grounded in reality, which was black workers tend to be the last hired during an expansion and the first cut during a contraction of any market or of any economy. But it was just it was jarring to read, A, that it was up, and B, that somebody said it's more signal than noise. Again, easy for an economist to say of any race. But I don't know. My mind leapt at that, but that might have just been, again, I was looking at the CNN report. That might have just been CNN kind of understanding their target demographic would then immediately start worrying about the political consequences. And this is not a political podcast, Sam.
No, but it is an election year, so you can understand why someone from a news organization might immediately make that sort of leap. Something to keep an eye on, certainly.
And in fact, black unemployment was up significantly last month to this, and part of a 3-month growth in the unemployment rate. It was up from 5.6 to 6.4, which is a fairly statistically significant jump.
Yeah, that's not nothing.
No. Any other thoughts on the jobs report?
No, it seems to be more of the same. It's And I think
When
that
will people start admitting the economy's good?
I think that they're starting to come around to it, and this is part of the realignment that I was talking about, right? Where people are, just not just the experts and policymakers and investors, but the sort of general public seems to be kind of warming up to this idea too. And public opinion about the economy is almost always a lagging indicator, unless it, except in cases of catastrophic sudden downturn.
Sure. Like a pandemic caused recession.
Yeah, or the financial crisis or something
Right.
like that.
Right. Polling still, though, and I know you're emphasizing it's a lagging indicator, but polling still in the United States indicates that opinions about the economy are almost totally predictable by political orientation, which is insane, but also expected.
Yes, I would agree. And I think that's almost always true. I think it might be more that might be a more valid analysis in political times such as ours.
All right. We don't talk about U.S. politics, but we do talk about foreign political circumstances. Turkey. Turkey had an election. This is a country of 85 million people, 17th largest annual GDP. Turkey. It's a big deal. It's in a really important place. Used to be called, or the landmass is still called Asia Minor. But anyway, local elections took place in Turkey on the 31st of March. The country has 81 provinces, a total of 30 metropolitan and over 1,300 district municipal mayors, more than 1,200 provincial, more than 21,000 municipal councilors were elected. So like they had governors, mayors, city councils, and then neighborhood representatives and elderly people's councils elected, right? So this is a non-parliamentary, non-presidential election, but it was a big election. And the Republican People's Party, which is abbreviated CHP, that's the Social Democratic Party, they gained 14 seats and they won in 35 provinces. The Republican People's Party, the CHP, they have a leader called Özgür Özel, won nearly 38% of the vote, beating Recep Erdogan's People's Alliance Party. Now, he's an autocrat. He's not supposed to lose elections.
Well,
this is a big upset, Sam, and there are two factors that make this upset interesting. I was reading. This is from Wikipedia. This is the first election since Özel took over the CHP, the opposition party, the Social Democratic Party. And it's the first election since the CHP had been part of a six-party coalition that had failed to beat Erdogan and the People's Alliance last fall in parliamentary and presidential elections. So a six-party coalition splinters, and the plucky little CHP with their brand new leader turn out this overwhelming victory. It's their best showing since 1977.
Yes.
And it's also the first time Erdogan's party has lost this kind of an election since Erdogan has come to power over 20 years ago.
That's right. It was justifiably seen as a big defeat for Erdogan, who had placed a lot of his own personal political capital at stake. At the same time,
bit like Trump in 2022 here in the midterms, right? He inserted himself into the election when he didn't have to.
Something like that, yes. Although we should recall that Erdogan himself was not on the ballot. And so nobody had the opportunity to vote for him. And much like the 2022 result here in the United States you were referencing. And another one of the big winners from this election was said to be the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu. And he won re-election for his third term. So he was already a powerful incumbent. And so, yes, it's a big victory for him. And he's widely seen as an emerging political leader in Turkey. For instance, Erdogan himself was mayor of Istanbul before becoming prime minister and then president. So, but it's not like İmamoğlu just was some upstart who came out of nowhere. He was already a two-term incumbent. So this is a big defeat for Erdogan and his AKP party. But it's not like, this, in the case of İmamoğlu anyway, it's not some totally outlandish result that we should not have expected. I think it's being a little bit overblown, but as you say, it is the biggest defeat that the AKP has suffered under Erdogan, who, let's face it, has been in power for a very long time.
Since '01.
Yeah, and is not getting any younger. The economy is terrible.
Yeah, they have runaway inflation, way worse than anything we've had here, right?
Oh, the inflation in Turkey is like 75%, right? I mean, and we thought it was a big problem here when it was like 7 to 9% or something like this, right? And so now, mind you, that was a big problem in Turkey last year when Erdogan was reelected, but it hasn't gotten any better. And that was one of the first things he should have tried to do upon gaining his newest presidential term.
Is this the trap of the autocrat? Because you get reelected for the whatever umpteenth time, and you're not as responsive to your voters. You're not as responsive to the actual conditions facing your country.
I think it could be partly because of that. It's important to understand, though, that Turkey, for its many democratic shortcomings, has never really been a dictatorship. In other words, Erdogan has done very many things to try and consolidate power in his own hands, successfully, I might add. But he still hasn't been able to fully move Turkey into a non-democratic country.
Thus, a result like this is possible.
It is still possible. It's very difficult. Now, you'll recall there was a coup mounted against him about 8 years ago, and he arrested many opposition figures, including judges and other politicians, right? And so again, he's tried very hard to sort of stack the deck in his favor, and he's been very successful with that. But it's difficult to fully succeed in that sort of endeavor when you've got some sort of democratic infrastructure underlying your political culture. Again, not dissimilar to what happened here, right? Donald Trump very much tried to sort of game the system, and it was successful in many respects. But there was such a large structure of democratic, small d, that is, governance, that was able to overcome these attempts. Hopefully, those same sort of structures will hold up this year. We don't know that they will, but we might hope that that's possible.
Also, just tip of the cap to the Turkish voter. Again, Erdogan's been in power for over 20 years, and so that's a long time to erode previously constitutional or democratic norms. And yet still, when the risks might be much more dire as, an opposition voter, let alone an opposition candidate. Turnout was just under 79%. So
very high, yes.
That's a big deal. Although it was down, I think, from the last election. I was reading on Wikipedia.
Well, sure, but presidential election turnouts are always higher here too. I mean, that shouldn't be that unusual, but that's still a very high turnout.
Right. And aren't turnouts always a little bit higher in autocracies because you kind of you would do well to be seen voting?
I guess, but again, I'm not comfortable characterizing Turkey as a full-on autocracy.
Okay,
right? It certainly it has a leader that has very strong autocratic tendencies, but again, he hasn't been fully successful in transforming the country to his liking. And
so we can differentiate Turkey from Russia in that manner.
I would also say Hungary. Hungary is, in their case, a much smaller country, so it's easier to do. Right, there's just a smaller number of people that you have to dislodge and replace in order to work your political will.
So you're saying, Orban's Hungary is closer to Putin's Russia than it is to the still quasi-democratic stew of Erdogan's Turkey?
I would say at least slightly. I can't imagine this sort of result happening in Hungary today.
Fair enough.
But I think overall, the main thing I would say that we've said many times here on Working for Crusoe is that people hate inflation. I mean, it's terrible.
That is the truth.
If things aren't getting better and they don't seem to believe that things are going to get better. I think that's the most important part. For instance, as we say, public opinion about the economy is slowly improving here in the United States, but that's not happening in Turkey. And it's much easier to take that out actually on your sort of local representatives and municipal leaders than it is on, especially when the president himself isn't even on the ballot. Right?
There's also
Nobody's scared of their mayor.
right.
Right.
Any other notes on Turkey's non-parliamentary, non-presidential election?
Well, I would just say that Erdogan is in kind of a weird place geopolitically, right? I mean, he is aspiring autocrat, as you say, but Turkey is also a NATO ally. And in spite of Erdogan's many, many imprecations against the West that he's leveled over the years, there's never been a hint of Turkey leaving NATO. And so he would very much like to be seen as the sort of middleman and possible peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine, for example. But at the end of the day, Turkey is still a NATO ally. And of course, Turkey controls access to the Black Sea by themselves. And so they're not going to, they're not going to want to make a whole lot of waves, if you'll pardon the expression.
I will.
And both Russia and Ukraine have lengthy coastlines along the Black Sea. So he can't, as much as Erdogan himself is an autocrat, he can't quite fully join the autocratic bloc of Russia and China. There's just too many obstacles standing in his way, and he may not even want to. He might prefer the sort of middle position that he occupies. But again, he's not getting any younger. And for something like this to befall him at this stage of the game has got to be sort of dispiriting for him.
To the Middle East, this reporting coming today from NPR here in the U.S., Israel's military says its investigation into airstrikes Tuesday that killed 7 aid workers in Gaza. Their investigation has concluded that the strikes were carried out in serious violation of military operating procedures. And the Israeli military says that senior military officers will be dismissed and reprimanded. This was the airstrikes carried out by the Israeli military on a 3-car convoy of the food charity World Central Kitchen, which has been running one of the most prominent aid operations in Gaza. And of course, this story caught fire this week.
Yes, it was just a harrowing account. In fact, the Israeli military pulled in a bunch of international reporters for a briefing overnight in which they issued extensive detail about what they said had happened. And the position of Israel on these attacks has always been, since they were announced, that there was a mistake, right? It was just a terrible, not just a mistake, but a sort of cascading series of mistakes. But other aid organizations have pointed out this week that, as a matter of fact, almost 200 aid workers have been killed since October 7th in Gaza. And so this, in some ways, this is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. Also, there's a sort of point of view that is prevalent amongst the Israeli right that all these aid organizations are just sort of Western pro-Palestinian leftists who hate us and don't actually have our best interests at heart. And I should say that this point of view has some purchase even amongst hawkish, right-leaning national security types here in the United States, people that we used to call neoconservatives. Perhaps not many of them, but certainly some. The problem in this case is that it's difficult to put World Central Kitchen in that category. They're not like the United States, I'm sorry, the United Nations Works and Relief Agency, UNRWA, or even Doctors Without Borders. They're relative newcomers to the humanitarian space. They were established only in 2010 in response to the catastrophic earthquake in Haiti, which we discussed in our episode about Haiti recently. And Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen, is a Spanish celebrity chef who just decided that he wanted to give back after a career of great success as a chef.
Right. And not some great anti-Israeli gesture.
No, and he's he came from the sort of entrepreneurial side of things, and by the way, World Central Kitchen served a very large number of meals up to Israelis who had been displaced by the October 7th attacks. So he has a fair amount of goodwill inside of Israel itself, unlike some of these other organizations who have only ever had reason to serve Palestinians. And so I'm given to understand that this attack on World Central Kitchen, that is on their staff, was one of the only sort of humanitarian-related news stories of the war so far that has actually broken through into the Hebrew language Israeli media in a way that stories about impending famine in Gaza generally have not. I don't know. I don't follow Hebrew language media in Israel. I couldn't understand it even if I did. So that's just what a couple of news reports that I've heard have said. But this was, I think that it probably was a mistake. Although, if you go through the report, I would say it's still sort of a gray area. And Jose Andres himself has said that he thinks that World Central Kitchen was deliberately targeted.
This prompted a phone call between U.S. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And Biden has been quietly, not quietly, depending on who you ask, pushing back with increasing firmness against Netanyahu and his prosecution of this war. And I think Biden used the term unacceptable during this most recent phone call. Where is the sweet spot for Biden on this?
I don't know, and I don't think he knows.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I believe that they're just sort of trying to keep up and hoping that this isn't going to get a lot worse very quickly.
It can't be, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sam. It just cannot be a radical position taken by any American politician or anybody who's concerned about the circumstance, the war, that Israel has a right to eliminate Hamas. Palestinians have the right to not starve or be bombed indiscriminately, and that aid workers shouldn't be targeted.
No, I agree with you entirely.
These are three these are not mutually exclusive.
Okay. Now, the only one of those notions that I would push back on only a little bit, mind you, is the elimination of Hamas. Now,
Israel should define that.
Right. Well, I have no good feeling towards Hamas whatsoever. Quite the reverse, I can assure you. One Israeli official who seems to have been dispatched to the United States to do media damage control this week is a fellow named Nir Barkat. And he is the Minister of Economy and Industry in Israel and belongs to Netanyahu's Likud party. He's also a former two-term mayor of Jerusalem. So he's a very well-established politician inside of Israel. And he's made a number of media appearances this week. I saw him first on the BBC and then yesterday on MSNBC. And he made a couple of different points. He insisted this was a mistake. And I don't want to go into whether or not I believe that's true, at least not in any great detail. But he went on to say that not that this was unintentional, and invariably he would say, but what was intentional was the Hamas attacks on October 7th. I think that's absolutely right.
It's a fair point.
And then he also said Hamas are Nazis. And ideologically, I think that's also true. If you look at all carefully into the ideology of Hamas, it's very much in line with Nazi ideology from the Second World War. And he also said that Hamas doesn't want a ceasefire. Again, that's also
totally true.
Right. But then he went on to say that Nazis were not left in place in Germany after the Second World War. And maybe Mr. Barkat doesn't know this, but that's not true. There was an extensive denazification program implemented by the United States and its allies to try and root out Nazis from German society. But it was abandoned because it was judged to be impossible.
They couldn't run the German state post-war without some of these people.
Not just that, but they couldn't definitively figure out who had and had not been a Nazi. And so, in fact, it emerged later that some Nazis were left in positions of power throughout Germany for years to come afterwards. Now, having said that, I should also say that Gaza is a much smaller piece of territory than Nazi Germany was, and Israel has much better intelligence capabilities inside of Gaza than the Allies had inside of Nazi Germany at the end of World War II. Still, you're not going to be able to fully eradicate Hamas. It's just not going to happen, especially because right now, every day, Israel is generating new Hamas supporters, some of whom haven't even been born yet.
No, I agree with that, too.
And you're not going to be able to fully eradicate Hamas. So we
should fine-tune the language.
Yes. And so you might say that they have the right to do so, and I would agree with that. But you're not going to be able to do it. In fact, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland party, is now the second largest party in Germany. That is the second most popular in opinion polls. Now, they're still not very popular, but they are descendants of the neo-Nazi parties in Germany. And so the idea that you're going to eradicate this whole ideological position is just not going to happen. And I would have hoped that Mr. Barkat had known that and had been able to acknowledge that, but he was not able to do so.
What's a better phrase then? Because Israel has the right to defend itself sounds a little bit squishy. And, you know, I don't think people of good faith around the world would have any issue with any country attempting to eliminate a threat from an entity like Hamas.
Sure. And I would say eliminate the threat is the right way to characterize that.
Okay.
Right. For example, the Nazis were not fully eradicated from Germany. Right. Sure. It just that the Nazi movement ceased to be a coherent threat. And Mr. Barkat also said that Hamas is going to come for, it's not just Israel, they're going to come for, the United States or the West in general and stuff like that. I don't quite see that. Right. Hamas, they certainly represent a radical Islamic ideology, some adherents of which would prefer to wage jihad on the West. Yeah, I get that. But he also, raised specters of Sharia law, right? And I'm sorry, that's not a coherent threat that someone in our country or Europe can really take seriously.
No.
And so on some level, I can understand Mr. Barkat being dispatched to the West to try and make the Israeli case. I just don't think he did an especially good job. That's all.
I mean, Hamas wasn't the entity that was carrying out terrorist attacks in the name of the Palestinian movement in the 70s, for example.
No, Hamas didn't even exist until the 80s.
Yeah. Okay. Also, Israel struck an Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, and reporting from the New York Times and Eric Schmidt this week has said that current and former U.S. officials are expressing fears that that could escalate hostilities in the Middle East and prompt retaliatory strikes against Israel and its ally, the United States. I guess we've been long talking about how could this mean escalation, but it does seem a bit, and in fact, it was termed by Ralph Goff, a former CIA official who has served in the Middle East. He told the New York Times that this Israeli strike in Syria against the Iranian embassy was, quote, incredibly reckless. So thanks, guys. Like, my God.
Yes, and in fact, just last week we were saying that the risks of escalation appeared to be moderating. And so I think part of the reason that this seemed to be reckless is that diplomatic targets are usually deemed off limits, right?
You're blowing up embassies, you're killing aid workers. Like, yes, Jesus, come on, Israel.
No, but in this particular case, though, diplomatic facilities are sovereign territory. All right. So the diplomatic compound in Damascus, the Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus, is sovereign Iranian territory. And that is something that's just generally not done, even in times of war. And so now, mind you, the first great departure from that tradition was when Iranian radicals during their revolution stormed the United States embassy in 1979.
Oh, no, in Tehran, of course, yes.
Yes, and so, if Iran is going to complain about that, then, well, they don't really have a strong leg to stand on. But, and in fact, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, the Iranian client in Lebanon, came out today in his traditional Friday message saying that there will be retaliation. But of course, this is the sort of thing that Hassan Nasrallah always says, so it's difficult to say, what it might mean.
That's actually his gig.
Kind of, yeah, right? Although still, like right after October 7th, the first thing he said was, it wasn't us, right? And so, again, we have to take all this with kind of a grain of salt.
Okay, so that attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, Syria, killed 3 generals in the Iranian Quds force and 4 other officers. Basically, Iran said Israel killed some of our important people who were at that embassy.
Oh, yes. I mean, these were...
Israel can make the case this was strategically necessary.
And they do say that these people were helping coordinate anti-Israel activity inside of Syria. And they probably were, by the way, right? That, you don't have guys, senior members of the Quds Force in Damascus just for fun.
Right. And they're not there on holiday.
No. And so still, though, it's hard to see how this is directly relevant to the conflict in Gaza. But of course, Israel, and especially the Netanyahu government, they consider Iran to be their chief adversary in the region, and they always reserve the right to strike against them at any time.
Well, I'm not surprised, but the Middle East has, for lack of a better term, hijacked the rest of this episode. So we don't have a lot of time to talk about U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, who is currently in the midst of her second visit to China, nor do we have a ton of time to talk about or to preview the Biden and Xi phone call from earlier this week, which lasted 1 hour and 45 minutes.
Yes. Now, I'm a great supporter of President Biden's campaign for re-election, but I wouldn't want to be on the phone with him for 2 hours. But
it is a long call.
Yes. And so, but Secretary Yellen only arrived in China yesterday. She's only started to make public appearances and have meetings, and she'll be there for a few more days. So we can talk about that next week. And in fact, next week we'll be spending quite a lot of time in Asia, or talking about Asia. The heads of government from both Japan and the Philippines will be hosted here in Washington by President Biden. And so we'll be talking about that. Also next week, South Korea is having election. So it'll be all Asia next week, unless something major comes up in some other theater.
A pivot to Asia, to coin a phrase.
Yeah. I like that. You just come up with that right now, John?
Just right now, yeah.
Wow.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us for this episode of Working for Crusoe. He is Sam Park. I'm John Ramey. Have yourselves a fine weekend, and we'll talk to you next Friday.
So long, folks.